So get this, podcast listeners. So Leland Vittert, he's a reporter for Fox News. He was in downtown Washington, D.C.
Yes.
In front of the White House. Now, the chances are, if you live in America, at some point in your lifetime, you've probably come to Washington, D.C., maybe even on a field trip.
I go once a year.
With your high school class. Maybe that's when it happened. But you came to Washington, D.C., you saw the monuments, and you also saw the White House. By that, I mean you walked outside the White House, outside the gates. Well, there was a protest that started there. Protest, by the way. Peaceful protest.
Yes.
And you know, there was a lot of course, yelling and so forth, which you would expect during a protest, but it was peaceful. And then Leland Vittert of Fox News, who was reporting in the middle of this protest, was spotted by a protester, and the protester having been somewhat informed that, hey, that is a Fox News reporter. I've seen him before. And then he yells at everybody, all of his friends, hey, that's a Fox News reporter. Let's get him.
Yeah.
So they chase him. They chase him, and Leland Vittert basically, you know, had to run for his life because some of the so-called peaceful protesters, not all, some of them decided to cross the line. And that's the danger when you get a lot of people together in a group, is someone always wants to be, it seems like there's always that one person who wants to, and this is what bothers me like crazy about millennials. They always have their phones out. And it's like, why aren't you at least protesting for the moment? Why do you need to have your phone out?
Yeah.
You either believe what you're doing, and that should satisfy you, that you're doing the right thing. Why in the world do you need to have your phone out to let the whole world know that you're so virtuous? I don't care that you're virtuous. You should care that you're virtuous. And that is the thing that drives me crazy about millennials, and I'll ask you about that in a minute. But first, let's hear Leland Vittert. Here's the clip of him talking about this escapade. Here it is.
A mob descended on us, chased us out of Lafayette Park there. There were 50 or 60 people who no longer cared about the Secret Service or yelling epithet at President Trump or talking about that. They came out after us, chased us out, took our camera, smashed our camera, took my microphone, threw it at me. We took a lot of body shots in terms of getting pushed around and shoved around, and then finally made our way about 2 blocks to where we could find a police cruiser, and then the police there called in reinforcements. It was the most scared I have been since being chased out of Tahrir Square by a group from the Muslim Brotherhood.
So that's Leland Vittert talking about it's the most afraid he's ever been since being chased by the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt when he was reporting there. So to the millennials in the room, you know, we've got Chris Hopkins, our assistant producer, but also Garrick here with Mark and the Millennials. And the question is, why is it so important that people have to make the news? These protesters, some of them decided to make the news, immediately whip out their phones and say, well, you got Fox News here reporting, let's beat the living you-know-what out of these people, maybe worse, maybe even kill them, and let's chase them down. Why is it that everybody has to broadcast themselves? If they really care about the issue, why is it that they have to let everybody know that they care about the issue?
Oh,
from the millennial perspective,
loaded because
it is. I know
there's a lot of different, competing viewpoints here. So to break a few of them down for you, of course, there's the people who just want to seem virtuous and display their virtue for everybody to see.
They're the egotistical people.
Yeah,
those are the they love themselves.
There's legitimate tactics as to why people pull things out. They want to document the things going on in the event that something that they view as bad happens to them. But also a lot of it is just I think a good portion of it is we're just living in a moment of history right now. And I'm not saying that there's, I think a bit of this is an apples to oranges comparison, but when you look at times in history where there's been these giant protests that have made history and that are always frequently talked about, look at Tiananmen Square. A lot of what we know from there is from people who brought cameras and documented all the things going on. And so, my generation particularly, I have anything better than you had growing up and a whole lot more in this little
That's a fact.
2x4 device here. And so...
But I think this little device here, this phone, cell phone.
Oh, it has unintended consequences.
I think it enables millennials in particular, but everybody, to be fair, to do things that they normally would never do because they are so all about themselves and they're so self-centered that they have to get the phone out and show, as you said, not just how virtuous they are because they're there protesting and maybe even rioting, but also just how cool they are because, they're with the cool crowd. And I got news for you. You know why this crowd isn't cool in Washington, D.C.? Not just because of what they did to a Fox News reporter, Leland Vittert, but they went to the Lincoln Memorial and defaced the front of the Lincoln Memorial and spray painted "Y'all tired yet."
And the
Now
the World War II memorial.
That's Antifa. And go ahead, the World War II memorial was also defaced.
I've seen a lot of what's the word? Incidental casualties, or not casualties, but people, things caught in the crossfire that it kind of leaves me scratching my head. Now, do I think that it's like people necessarily understand what they're doing when they go up to these things and do this? Probably not, but I saw there was an Armenian genocide memorial in Minnesota or Denver, it was in Denver,
okay,
that was defaced with, graffiti, and it's just,
why?
I don't understand why.
Yeah, well, and I bet you the idiots that did that don't understand why either, because we don't teach history. We certainly don't teach American history. We don't teach world history in K to 12. I'm talking about it's just, people graduate and they're completely illiterate about history.
Yeah.
Had they actually understood about history, look, there's no better way to lose the entire country over what happened to this gentleman in Minnesota, the murder of this gentleman. There's no better way to lose the entire country than to deface the World War II memorial or the Lincoln Memorial. Can you imagine?
It's a shame because
the guy who ended slavery as we know it
and
saved the country, they decide to go to that memorial of all memorials?
And to me, it's a shame because, we let off the show saying that essentially there's been universal condemnation for the actions of the man who killed George Floyd. And I think if you were somebody who really did want to see police reform in this country, there was no better time to do it than now. You finally had an event where even, the staunchest of conservatives who are very reluctant to label any foul doing on police behalf saw this and was like, I can't come up with anything. And here we are.
But I don't think conservatives, well, look, I'll speak for myself. I certainly don't look for reasons to, I try to look for the truth, right?
Yeah.
And there's no doubt of what we saw is what we saw. But there's also no doubt that in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, St. Paul, there's a problem. There's probably a systemic problem. But the systemic problem is not necessarily the fact that every officer is this way, but that
it's the lack of accountability.
There's no accountability,
Yeah.
right? And so they're not cleansing the system by getting rid of bad cops.
Bad cops.